Lisa.
Hi, Steve.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very good. Happy to be here for another conversation with you. And this week, the topic, I believe, is chaos.
Chaos.
Woo! Why do we want to talk about chaos?
Oh gosh, the world's been feeling a bit chaotic, hasn't it? For a few
Yes.
years now.
Yeah, it's hard to think, when did it not feel chaotic? Maybe it never did, and we were all just immune to it. But it definitely feels like it's ramped up and continues to ramp up.
Yeah, I still remember even before COVID hit, we were talking about VUCA and, a chaotic world and volatility and uncertainty and all of that, right? There's a sense that the world is speeding up, right? Inventions are speeding up, technology is speeding up, everything's just faster, faster. And I think possibly that might be leading us to talking about chaos. And then, COVID hit, and then then we're like, oh my gosh, now it really is chaotic.
Yeah.
And now we're in the aftermath, I think. Who knows what's coming, but it feels like what has been a bit of an arc with COVID, but also we're still talking about chaos and change and uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the moment in the UK, and I assume over there, it's just there's a lot of economic turmoil right now. There's a lot of turmoil in politics, in beliefs, and in just almost all areas. There seems to be just more and more of a right and left divide. There's less middle ground. Everything feels like it's getting divided. I think that's partly fueling this sense of sort of separation. When I think of chaos, I also, it's like it also for me comes up as the separation, just lack of connection and just lots of noise. At least that's how I sort of feel it. Don't know. What about you?
Yeah, it does feel that way, and it just feels ultimately like things are unpredictable, I think.
Mm.
When I sit with the idea of chaos, what does that mean? It means I can't predict what's coming. It means that there's a bunch of change that's happening. That tends to be where people start using the word chaotic. Oh, I like there's stuff coming my way. I can't predict it, and I don't know which way it's coming, what the impact's going to be. Like that's kind of the feel of it. And just as I said that, I noticed that I'm speaking faster. I can feel it in my body kind of bubbling up. But certainly we're living through times of people not even listening to each other, and disagreements and these kind of this either or, my camp or your camp. Having said that, if we look back historically, I think we've seen this throughout, humankind, or, we've seen this. And we're certainly living through it now as well.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as you were talking. I was thinking, yeah, surely this has been around since, well, as long as anyone can remember. But I think maybe it's because at least maybe we're sort of not too dissimilar in age. It feels like there was this little calm period before the chaos for our version of the chaos. It's like, for me at least, there was no major events happening over the first, 20, 30 years of my life. All the major events and the chaotic events, as you would call them, we learned about those in history at school, in the wars and all the other things. And then it felt like there was this period of stability. And now I guess we're just going through our version of obviously not the wars as we know them, but there's still wars going on. There's the Ukraine situation, and there's stuff that we never talk about because it's probably a bit far over there. So yeah, I think the sense of chaos for me and maybe others in my sort of sphere is just because it feels unusual compared to what we were used to. But yeah, whether it's unusual when you look at the span of time, maybe not. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to sort of try and find ways to process it and manage it, because in addition to the chaos of the world events, there's also just the chaos around us, the amount of information that you alluded to earlier, like the social medias and the amount of noise that probably people before our generation never really had to deal with.
Yeah, there's almost these different levels of chaos, right? There's chaos at a macro level. If we look at it, if we go even further, it might just seem like a blip in time, right? Where there's kind of some years or amount of time that's a bit more stable, and then others that feel a bit more chaotic, right? And then we zoom in, and even at a family level, at an individual level, we can just have the impact of chaos. I know from people that I'm talking to around in office, out of office, what's coming, like even things like that, what's going to be, people want to come into the office, they don't want to come into the office, how long they're coming into the office, is it going to be dictated, is it's not, from that perspective. Then there's inflation happening, like, so there's these things that even from a micro level, from a family unit level, it's now starting to impact them. And the piece that I think makes it feel chaotic is that there's uncertainty around it. They're not sure how things will level off, or whether they will, right? That's the question that our mind starts to ask us. Oh gosh, what's the impact? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage? Am I going to have to go in and do commuting again? Am I going to have, so all these things where we don't have this idea that we have control over it, and that we can't predict what's coming, I think makes it feel chaotic. And certainly from the part that you're saying in terms of the noise, that has continued to increase, and it's hard to, I find, quiet that down without consciously deciding to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably dipping into almost the sort of partly into how do we deal with it, isn't it? Like partly maybe it is a choice of, I need to find a way to start to slow down some of these things, the things we can control, because there's so much we can't control in terms of, you know, the exterior world. There are certain things we can choose to do, which is start to look at the way we process all this information around us, and how we start to reconnect back to sort of the moment, the present, and less about the future, which is where a lot of the stress comes from. It's the worrying, isn't it? Like you said, about the future stuff. But I do think, at least for me, a big improvement has been just this reducing the noise, whether it's the apps, the social media, just starting to take charge over time, start to notice where the time goes, because, you know, there's one thing dealing with world events, but the next thing is seeing everyone's opinion on the world events, and then seeing everyone's opinion on everyone else's opinion on the world events, and it's just like a never ending. There's just so much noise, and you start to feel like, in a way, you can start to feel like the world is completely angry and everyone is living in chaos. But actually, a lot of the noise isn't the reality. It's not the actual representation of most people. I think that it's a big distinction, at least that I've really started to believe in recently, is that actually we're seeing a filter on the world and people's views. Most people are good people, and a lot of that chaos is coming from the news and the social media stuff.
Yeah, I think you're touching on one of those tools that I think both of us use, both with ourselves and with coaching clients, or which is just looking at the perspective that we're holding, right? And realizing even that there is more than one way of looking at things, right? Especially when we get overly engaged in one particular perspective, just releasing it slightly and having, or acknowledging that there are different ways of looking at something, that there are different lenses we can put on. I think that kind of helps to soothe whatever story we're telling ourselves in the moment.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think often, because there's so much noise, there's noise from external, there's noise that we see through social media, and there's noise in our own heads that we create, our own stresses, there's people around us. So there's all these different layers of noise that contribute to the chaos and the uncertainty. So I think at some point we do have to sort of try to pause, freeze frame, and go, right, what is actually, you might start with our own sphere. For me, that's where it starts, because, you know, although sometimes it feels like we want to be responsible for the whole world and solving everything, that's what our brain wishes we could. It's impossible. So for me, just that realization of bringing acceptance to what is, like, the world is as it is right now. There's nothing I can do about it. Lots of things are as they are. I don't like it, but I accept it for now. And if you reduce some of that heaviness and start to go, right, in my sphere, what can I control? And for me, it is initially, it's my space. So it's like the physical space, which is cleaning this space. I've said this a few times, I think, before, about tidying up. I'm very big on tidying, which is why I've got a white room behind me, because it helps me feel less cluttered in my mind. Same with apps on your phone, same with getting rid of all that other, some of all the notifications gone. That's one step towards a little bit less chaos, a little bit less noise. And then you've got your own mind, which is making up stuff around, a lot of the time, your own life circumstances and your situation. And then it's like what we've said before as well, start noticing those thoughts. And for me, just noticing them and going, oh, there's some more thoughts, there's some more thoughts, there's some more thoughts, and making a pause, that, I don't know, that stops me feeling quite as cluttered as well. And then the next thing, I guess, is how the response to the world stuff. It's like looking at it in different layers for me. I don't know about you. How do you deal with sort of chaos in when you're feeling a bit like it's all up here?
I think it comes down to simply slowing down. So all of the things that you've just said, I do. You can tell my background's pretty tiny. Actually, is how I like things. So I have that same kind of feeling. Like if things are kind of organized around me, then I feel like something has been released, right? And I think I ask myself, so acceptance for sure, just this is how things are. And then to ask myself, what can I control? Like, not even control is the wrong word. What can I influence? How do I want to engage with this? What difference can I make? Some of those kind of questions, because I think control is what gets us into trouble. This perceived notion that we have control over how things will work out, I think gets us into trouble as human beings often. And so asking ourselves, or asking myself, like, how do I want to engage with this? What difference can I make in my, as you say, sphere of influence, in my kind of area of influence? And I think once you start kind of getting away from the back and forth of what's going on, and just ask, what is there to do right now? What can I influence now? How can I engage in this right now, rather than tomorrow or a month from now? Like, what can I do right now? Sometimes it's just taking a nice warm bath, right? Just to calm your nervous system so that you can have a clear mind to figure out what you actually want to do. Or and sometimes it's meditating or just quieting things down. I'm similar to you in the sense that I don't like notifications. Because it just feels like it's interruptions coming my way all the time. So I don't have any of those. And that helps a lot, just to clear some of that noise, some of that ongoing mental weight or load that I think a lot of people are holding on to, because the mind is just constantly engaged and being interrupted, and that takes a toll on us, increases stress levels. It's very energetically draining for our brain, and I think that adds to the things that we hear on headlines and social media and stuff. So
I don't.
It sounds like I've said a lot of what you said.
No. I mean, I'm glad it's not just. I'm glad I know we're similar, right? So it doesn't surprise me that you said it said that. But I think as you were talking, what made me think was like, almost like we're not cut out or programmed for this. Like, up until 50 years ago, we were, we didn't know anything about this technology. These apps, this notifications, this social media. It's like we haven't had the time, I don't think, genetically to adjust to this level of chaos in a way. So because I think a lot of that noise and notification is chaos. Most of it's not particularly useful. I think most people would agree with that. So I do think it's a big contributor to a lot of people's sense of stress and sense of chaos, because it's not particularly normal to have that level of stuff coming at you. I'm sure when things were going on earlier in the century, last century, it's like you might have a debate with your friends about a big news topic, but you wouldn't have all this information to have to process and take up that mental space. So sometimes I think it's good just for us to remember that, to think, why are we so stressed? Why am I so feeling so chaotic, it's like, well, have a look at the amount of stimulus in your mind that you're trying to process, and then start to look at, I know what solution I think in here where I am. It's like, start to look at where can I slow some of that down or remove some of that to make some space for action. Like you said, where can I take some level of control, whether we use that word or not, some level of influence over my situation. Even if it's not the wider situation, but your situation, because it's got to start somewhere. So there's lots of things I do think we can do in our own lives to kind of just to calm things down and ultimately like take some action, because if we can't take action, then that's the place to, I would say, surrender. It's okay, can I do anything right now? No. Okay, then I'm comfortable, I've tried, and therefore all I can do is to surrender and trust and be with. And most often, a lot of the times, things can be never as bad as we imagine, because the imagination tends to run wild, and things that we think 100 things are going to go wrong, maybe one might, or two might come true, but often a lot of the stuff in our minds doesn't materialize. And even when it does, one or two things that do happen that might not be ideal, we always have the energy and the focus to deal with it at the time. That's at least in my life. Whenever those things that happen that aren't ideal, you suddenly get this energy and that focus of clarity to deal with it, and it's trusting that will happen when it happens. Otherwise, try and it's just about trying to come bring back the balance, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's normal, and for our brain to kind of go in loops and look at what are the risks here, what are the things that I need to look out for my survival, and our brain really likes it when we're able to predict things, which is becoming increasingly more difficult. And so to the extent that I find these kind of questions around, what do I know? Right? Like what are some things that I just know? Kind of allows our kind of brain to sit with what does feel certain for ourselves. And then the other piece is actually working through the worst case scenario, because there's a way that our brain can just, as you said, kind of just add on that this can happen and this, and it just gets more and more dire. And to the extent that we could say, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario here? If that were to happen, what would I do? Like if it just all went to shit, what would I do? And again, that kind of because our brain doesn't want us to pin things down often. It just likes these thought loops, right? And it's always scanning for risk and then just going, oh no, what if this happens? What if this happens? But if we start to pin down these thoughts and actually get conscious and intentional with them and go like, what if the worst case scenario, like what if I couldn't pay my mortgage? Like what if that happens? Right? And I'm using that as an example because it's been coming up in as interest rates have been going up, inflation's up, this is a reality for some people. Like what if that were to happen? And then what would you do? And having a plan seems to allow the brain to quiet down a little bit and go, okay, if that were to happen, we've got a plan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, part of me also wonders, if we did know totally everything that was happening and there was no chaos, what would life be like? Because I kind of have a feeling it might be a bit boring. And obviously I'm not talking about the horrendous chaos, like the extreme chaos situations. Nobody wants that. But I don't know. I think part of life is adventure, isn't it? And unknown and exploration. And I do wonder if everything was completely perfect and there was none of that, what would we talk about? How would we use our problem solving skills? How would we grow our comfort zones and all of that? So maybe one perspective is what if chaos is actually helpful for me or something,
Well, I recently heard a podcast about this, which was it was a Brooke Castillo podcast, and she was talking about the fact that our growth comes from difficult times. And so not only should we kind of anticipate that they're coming, because they're always coming, and when we're in them, they're always on their way out, right? Because it's just as cyclical in a reality of life that difficult times happen. And that one of the ways that she holds difficulty, even if she says, if your life's too easy, if it's too simple, then you're not stretching yourself enough, right?
Yeah.
And so when she doesn't have difficulty in her life, she creates some bigger goals, some bigger impact she wants to have, so that she puts herself in a place to grow.
Yeah.
Personally,
Makes sense.
professionally. And so that speaks to what you're saying, which is, if everything were perfect, like, how would that really be? What would the actual experience of that be or mean? And I agree. I think when we think that things are supposed to be a certain way, that, the waters are always supposed to be kind of calm and peaceful, and we don't kind of anticipate that there will be some rough waters along the way, then we're setting ourselves up for more stress. We're setting ourselves up for more anxiety around that. Whereas when we say, well, listen, I know that those waters are coming. I know that weather storm is coming. It always in the process of coming. And when we strengthen the resourcefulness or the connection to the innate resourcefulness that we have, I think we can be okay with that weather storm coming and go, okay, well, where's my opportunity to grow here?
Yeah, 100%. Because we're definitely not made for no chaos. So we're part of the nature, right? The animal kingdom, the human beings, but we're in history, no one's ever had an easy ride. We've got a much easier ride than probably most if we look back through the generations and eons of life. Like, humans probably weren't meant to have a smooth sail. It's all about the adventure, exploration, and yeah, that's possibly that's part of the life. But the meaning of life is to go on that adventure, and in our own unique way. So yeah, the more we talk, the more I'm realizing, I don't want an total end to chaos.
Yeah, well, and to learn from that, right? I know it feels a little I don't know, repetitive to say that, but I think people say it because it's true. It is an opportunity to grow and to learn something, if not about the external world, about ourselves, and to expand our ability to be with chaos, our ability to be with uncertainty, and to even strengthen the kind of connection we have with that part of us that just ultimately always figures things out, right? The fact that we're all either listening to this or is because you figured things out to get to today, right? And that comes from that part of you that just in the moment knows what to do. Often it's not the overthinking that helps us. It's the settling into, what do I need to do right now? And that kind of knowledge just comes. And I love that you refer to nature, because nature has an innate intelligence, and we do too. And that's what comes out when we need it, in the face of chaos, in the face of uncertainty, in the face of stressful times.
Indeed. I mean, there's always going to be chaos in nature, right? There's natural chaos everywhere, and it's I think part of the moving forward is the acceptance, like we talked about earlier. So if we accept there will always be levels of chaos, but we're almost willing to explore that, and we're willing to push through it, and we're willing to learn, then that becomes a bit of the adventure, really, doesn't it? I feel like people that might say, oh, it's easy for you to say that, and just naturally I'm always going to worry. I think that's the thing I've always challenged with anyone that says that about anything. I think if you believe that thought and you never challenge that thought, then you will always feel stressed or in chaos. If you start to challenge the thought and say, actually, what if I choose to start building a muscle, as we always say, of a new thought, that is, I welcome chaos and I welcome the learning from it, and I'm going to adapt through it and become a bigger, more interesting version of myself. And that's a whole nother way of looking at life. And I think we can do that in so many areas and retrain ourselves to sort of almost not be victims. I don't like that word, but you know what I mean. Not be victims of circumstances, but take a more proactive approach to how we live and how we respond to daily events of our lives.
Yeah. So a few of the things that we said, first start with acceptance, right? Accept that the world is what it is, and that things happen without our influence or control over. And so acceptance is the first one. The second one is to really look at that constantly coming, right? When we're in good times, we know that some difficult times are coming, that it's just the natural way that the world and our lives unfold, that there are good times. I'm going to put them in quotations because even that is a judgment of good times and bad times or difficult times, but that there's fluctuations, right? That we all go through difficult times. Thirdly, they're an opportunity to learn and grow, right? That we could hold them as such. What did I miss, Steve?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of them. One is look at these things that maybe just look at what are these things that are causing this sense of overwhelming chaos, and then what can I control? Whether you write them down or you step through them in your mind, okay, can I control that? No, then I choose to bring acceptance. Not, I don't like it. It's not that I like it, but I choose to accept it, that is the reality for now. And step through that process. And then where there are areas you can control or influence, maybe take an action, something you really care about, take an action in that area. And all of a sudden, when you take some kind of action in anything, all of a sudden you've created momentum, you've moved forward in a way, and things feel less chaotic because you do feel like you've got that semi-sense of control. So that always helps. And then the other thing I would just say is really take a look at your environment, both your physical environment and your sort of mental environment. Look at the things that are adding to that sense of chaos and overwhelm, and start to gradually eliminate the ones that aren't serving you.
Mm-hmm. And have a plan for worst case scenario. If
Yeah.
all of that stuff doesn't help, have a plan for it. Go, if this happens, what would I do? So
sometimes looking it in the eye actually helps, rather than oh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it. Actually, sometimes thinking about it or even walking it through. This is a coaching technique that's often really useful. It's to walk it through, face your fear, and it's often never as bad as you actually imagine.
Yeah. Well, there's lots there.
There's always lots there when we get into these topics, but yeah, it's always an enjoyable discussion. But yeah, I think we'll leave it there for now until the next time.
We'll see you next time.